Okay, welcome back. In this section, we're going to talk about defects of character, and those can be unhealthy or undesirable qualities, traits that we find. Ideally, this is done through honest introspection. We take stock of ourselves and our lives, and we ask, what are the things about myself that I most want to change? Now, the biggest caveat that I add to this is that it really hinges on your ability to be a fair judge of yourself. I think if we're overly self critical, if we're a perfectionist or trying to live our lives above reproach, we may feel that we're not enough of something. And so, what I encourage people to do is if you have any healthy people in your life, and you could share with them, here are things about myself that I want to change, here are things about myself that I feel are lacking or unhealthy. Get their feedback. I think of it as a reality check. Sometimes we're just way too harsh in our assessment. But if you do find things that you want to change, that's great. Let's make that investment. Let's look at assuming that it is something that is amenable to change. There's a handful of aspects of our identity that are not amenable to change, nor are they reasons why we should feel less than. The race, color, creed, ethnicity, sexual orientation. These are some of the they're very foundational and important parts of our identity. Sometimes they're things that we're conflicted about. But for the purposes of this course, I'm gonna treat those as things about yourself that deserve to be honored. Things that you want to change about yourself are worth examining because sometimes they're based on standards that aren't yours. I would love to have $1 for every time somebody has told me that they're not thin enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough. And I'll ask them to consider, are those really your values that you're judging by? Or could it be that those are societal norms? When I talk, particularly with women who tell me that they're not thin enough, I'll ask them, why that's important, why it's valuable. But I'll also offer them a reality check. I'll ask them, what is the average dress size of a woman living in the United States? And they will almost always guess wrong. They'll usually say something like somewhere between 8 and 12 is where they guess. The average is somewhere between 14 and 16, actually. So when we're looking at the standards or the criteria by which we judge ourselves, ideally those are based on our own beliefs and values and not someone else's, not the values necessarily of even our family. I think ideally as we go through a process of developing identity, we challenge what we were taught in terms of philosophy and morality and religiosity and all of those things and choose for ourselves. I don't think there's any wrong choice, but if you have simply accepted what was given to you without challenge, there may well be opportunity there. Another caution, oftentimes when people tell me about their character defects, what they're describing is more of a euphemism than a reality. So the biggest example is I hear from lots of folks that they're lazy or they see themselves as lazy. And quite often that's not the real issue. The real issue is that they're afraid to try, they're afraid to take a risk. I have a great affinity for slackers. I was one for a lot of years. Slackers are people who are afraid of their potential. And so I wouldn't argue with a person, yes, maybe it is the case that you need to be more productive, but let's look at why you are the way that you are. Is that unhealthy or undesirable behavior really masking something else? Uh, Oftentimes I will translate for people what I think underlies that personality trait or that defect of character. I've had a lot of folks say to me, I have a lot of anger issues. And when I process them with them, what I find is that they're very fearful of vulnerability. They're very fearful of expressing sadness, disappointment, and pain. And so what we can't or won't allow ourselves to express gets funneled into anger. So if being angry or having a lot of anger is something that you see as a defect or something that is undesirable, I would say let's examine it closely and find out what that's really about. It saddens me that quite often when people tell me about their character defects, they're describing things like being too emotional, too sensitive. Sometimes they reject themselves by virtue of having a mental illness. They'll say to me, I'm ridiculously anxious, I have no reason to be depressed. And I'll say, whoa, okay, we don't like judge people for being mentally ill, do we? And they'll immediately be like, well, no, certainly not. Like, okay, so if it's not fair to judge others for that, then it's not fair to judge you for that. If you live with something like depression and anxiety, then overcoming that should be the goal. But viewing it as a defect of character is like saying there's something wrong with me. And I think there's a great opportunity to change our perspective on that and to have a healthier approach. Another important one, being needy. I get that one a lot, and I am quick to point out to folks that having a lot of needs doesn't make one a needy person. Quite often what it means is a person has not gotten their needs met, has been afraid to ask for their needs to be met, and has not made themselves a priority in their own lives. So that too is worth identifying and considering. So when we identify what is it about myself I don't like, so quite often what will come out in that list are insecurities. Insecurities are reasons why we feel we're not enough, or reasons why we feel we're not good enough. We can take the character defect that we don't like. So for example, being an impatient person would be a great example of a character defect. And then we could look at, okay, what do I want to change that to? Well, I'd like to be a person who's more patient. And then we can explore, okay, what are the things that make it hard for you to be patient? What are the experiences that you've had in the past? For a lot of us, what we learned, I think, was that if there wasn't instant gratification or if things didn't happen right away, then that meant they were never going to happen. So take some time, grab pen and paper, and write out what are the character defects that you'd most like to change. And then let's consider what resources could you draw from in making those changes. Is there more knowledge that's needed? Or is there somebody who's an expert on that? Is there a good book to pick up about that? I always encourage simplicity, so you might consider, who do I know that's really good at that, and what could I learn from them? Whose example could I follow? Do I have mentors in my life? Do I have role models? Do I have people that I would like to emulate and learn from? Mentoring is something that I'm especially passionate about, because when people achieve great things, if they're good folks, very often they like to share what they've learned. They want to prevent others from making the kind of mistakes that they made. And I always point to this in my work as an adjunct instructor. So when I work as an adjunct instructor, I make literally 10% of what I make at doing most of the other things that I do. So obviously I'm not doing it for money. I do it as a labor of love. I do it because I want to have ripple effects, and I want to be able to share things that I've learned. So I think that's well worth considering. And then the next piece is, would it be helpful for me to have some professional support with this? What kind of natural support do I have with this? And then the final piece is to ensure that we have tons of accountability. So whenever I set a goal for myself, no matter how big or small it is, I'm going to make sure that I share that with people that care about me. I want to have folks checking up on me. I like that the people in my life encourage me and reassure me and express their confidence that I can achieve goals. But what I really need is somebody who's holding my feet to the fire. Because if you're anything like me, you're likely to have times where you disappoint yourself, let yourself down. People like me tend to be very focused on not disappointing others, but too often we see it as acceptable to disappoint ourselves. So having accountability for our goals increases follow-through, and it increases having adequate support in our lives. And so I can't express strongly enough how important that is. Be fair in your judgment of you. Be kind. The things that you see as unacceptable, at least temporarily, we need to treat them like they are acceptable. If you make the mistake of telling yourself that you shouldn't be this way, or that you should be over it by now, or that by this age it shouldn't even be an issue anymore, what you're doing is saying this shouldn't be here. And if, as long as we're saying that, chances are we're not going to do anything to change it. So acceptance is just for today, this is what it is, but going forward, here's my vision of what I want it to be. Here's my plan to attain that. It's not gonna be just an intention or a nice idea. I'm actually gonna plan some steps. I'm gonna draw on the personal and professional supports that I need to accomplish this. I'm gonna make sure that I have support and accountability, and a little bit at a time. I'm going to overcome these challenges. I'm going to eliminate these behaviors, and I'm going to replace them with these very positive characteristics and habits and behaviors that serve me well. Really, really encourage you to do some writing on that. We'll be back in the next section talking about other aspects of identity.